She was Ella, the Pax Omega, the dust beneath their feet. He was Alpha Maddox, the man who publicly rejected her, shattering her heart in front of the entire pack. But when a traitor's blade and a raging blizzard leave him for dead, only Ella hears the call. Tonight, the weakest wolf in the Stonecrest pack will face a 10-mile wall of ice and wind. She will have to carry the very man who broke her, or let him die and lose her soul. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of what happens when the most underestimated heart becomes the only one strong enough to save them all. The Stonecrest pack territory was carved from the hard, unforgiving granite of the Rocky Mountains. It was a life of cold air, towering pines, and a social structure just as rigid. You were born into your rank, and you stayed there. At the very bottom was Ella Vance. She was the Pax Omega. It wasn't just a title, it was a job description. She was the mediator, the cleaner, the one who absorbed the pack's collective stress. While others trained for combat, she studied. Her small cabin at the edge of the packlands was overflowing with dried herbs, poultices, and medical texts. She was the pack's unofficial healer, a role that earned her tolerance, but never respect. She was small for a werewolf, her human form slender and quiet, with eyes the color of a stormy sky. Her wolf was a pale, silver gray, barely larger than a timber wolf. In a pack that valued strength, muscle, power, and dominance, Ella was seen as a flaw. Tonight was the Luna's Hunt, a ceremonial gathering held under the first full moon of winter. It was the night the Alpha, if he was unmated, was expected to formally announce his choice for Luna. The Alpha was Maddox Blackwood. Maddox was everything Ella was not. He was immense, both in human and wolf form, a leader forged in a rogue war that had almost cost them their territory. He was commanding, powerful, and carried an aura of cold authority. Ella, like every other she-wolf, felt the primal pull toward him. But for her it was different. It was the agonizing, undeniable tug of the mate bond. She knew he felt it. She'd seen it in the way his eyes would snag on her for a fraction of a second before he'd mask it with a scowl. But an Alpha mated to an Omega, it was unheard of. It was a political weakness. Ella stood at the back of the great hall, her hands tucked into the pockets of her worn flannel shirt. The hall was loud, filled with the boisterous energy of wolves. Vanessa, the daughter of the pack's lead enforcer, was front and center, laughing loudly, her red dress a stark challenge. She was the obvious choice, strong, beautiful, and utterly cruel, especially to Ella. The air crackled. Alpha Maddox stood on the hearth, his presence silencing the room. "Tonight the blizzard begins," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Ella's bones. "Winter will test us. It demands a strong pack, a pack with no weaknesses." His eyes scanned the crowd. Ella felt her heart hammer against her ribs. He looked right at her. For one terrifying, hopeful second, the world stopped. His gaze passed over her. It didn't just slide by. He looked at her, and then through her, as if she were nothing more than a crack in the floor. A look of such profound dismissal that it was louder than a physical blow. Vanessa's smirk was venomous. She knew. Maddox turned his attention to the elders. "A pack is only as strong as its Luna. We need a partner who can stand against our enemies, who can birth strong heirs, not distractions." The word distractions hung in the air, aimed directly at her. Ella felt the blood drain from her face. It was one thing to be ignored. It was another to be publicly, deliberately humiliated. He wasn't just not choosing her. He was announcing to the entire pack that she was unworthy of even being considered. He was rejecting the bond. Tears, hot and sharp, blurred her vision. She didn't make a sound. She just turned, slipping through the back door as the wind began to howl, the first icy needles of the storm striking her face. The cold was nothing compared to the ice in her chest. The mate bond, stretched and abused, felt like it was tearing her soul in two. She ran, her human feet stumbling, toward the only place she felt safe, her tiny cabin on the edge of the world. The blizzard hit the Stonecrest Mountains like a divine punishment. It was not a gentle snow, it was a howling, blinding whiteout, a vertical wall of ice that erased the world. By the time Ella reached her cabin, her hair was frozen stiff. She slammed the door, the flimsy wood rattling in its frame. She was shaking, but not from the cold. The rejection echoed in her mind, a continuous loop of Maddox's dismissive gaze and Vanessa's triumphant sneer. Distraction, weakness. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Her wolf whimpered, a low, grieving sound that was more human than animal. The mate bond was a living thing, and Maddox had just driven a knife into it. It ached, a deep, cellular throb that radiated from her heart. She was broken. She spent hours just listening to the storm, a physical manifestation of her own inner turmoil. The wind screamed like a banshee, and snow began to drift against her windows. No one would be out in this. The pack would be secure in the main lodge, feasting, celebrating. Vanessa would be at Maddox's side, laughing. Ella pushed the thought away. She was a healer. She would heal. She'd survived this long, hadn't she? She would build her walls higher. She lit a fire, the small flames a weak defense against the cold. She boiled water for tea, her hands moving on autopilot, crushing dried chamomile and valerian root, herbs for calm, for grief. It was well past midnight when she felt it. At first it was nothing. A flicker. She paused, the cup halfway to her lips. The storm was deafening, yet underneath the wind she heard a sound, a single, strained whine that was ripped away as soon as it was born. She stood, setting the cup down. "It's the wind," she whispered. But then came the scent. Even with the cabin sealed, the wind forced air through every crack. It brought the smell of ozone, pine and blood. Copper. Sharp and metallic. And beneath that, the one scent she would know anywhere, the scent that was imprinted on her DNA, cold stone and fresh-cut pine. Maddox, her wolf, moments ago lethargic with despair, shot to its feet inside her mind. Mate. Hurt. Mate. Hurt. "No," Ella whispered, backing away. "He rejected us. He's in the lodge. It's a trick of the wind." The scent grew stronger. The blood was fresh, and it was mixed with something else, something foul and forbidden. Silver. A primal terror, colder than the blizzard, seized her. Silver didn't just wound werewolves, it poisoned them. It burned through their healing abilities, severing their connection to their wolf, and cooked them from the inside out. He wasn't in the lodge. He was out there. He was dying. The rejection, the humiliation, all of it evaporated. The raw, undeniable command of the mate bond, the drive to protect, superseded everything. He was her alpha. He was her mate. And he was in mortal danger. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her leather medical satchel, stuffing it with her most potent remedies. Powdered silver antidote, a rare moss, thick bandages, and a paste of wolfsbane. Ironically, a poison to humans, but a powerful stimulant for a wolf's dying heart. She grabbed a flask of water, a small, stale loaf of bread, and pulled on the thickest pair of wool-lined boots she owned. She topped it off with her father's old canvas Carhartt jacket, a garment stained with grease and memories, but thicker than any modern coat she owned. She opened the door, The wind tore it from her grip, slamming it against the cabin wall. The world outside was gone, replaced by a churning vortex of white. Stepping into it was suicide. Mate. Hurt. "I'm coming," Ella whispered, and plunged into the storm. The world ceased to exist. There was no up or down, no sky or earth. There was only the wind and the white. The snow was already waist-deep in the drifts, and Ella was forced to shift. Her small silver wolf was better suited to this. She stayed low, her paws sinking deep, but she was lighter than her human form. The wind was a physical blow, trying to topple her, its howl a deafening shriek in her sensitive ears. But her nose was her compass. Blood. Silver. Pine. She pushed against the storm, her muscles already burning. She was an Omega. She didn't have the raw power of a Beta or the stamina of an Enforcer. She was built for endurance, for weathering pain. She would need it. She fought her way through the drifts for what felt like an eternity. Each breath was a razor blade of ice. She followed the scent trail away from the lodge, deeper into the forested hunting grounds. Why had he come out here? The Luna's hunt had been ceremonial, held in the cleared space near the lodge. The scent trail grew stronger. She could smell the fear sweat of another wolf, and the bitter tang of a struggle. She crested a small ridge, and the wind briefly parted the curtain of snow. What she saw stopped her heart. It was a clearing, or it had been. Now it was a scene of utter carnage. 2 wolves, rogues by their stench, were dead, their bodies already disappearing under the snow. But they hadn't been killed by claws, they'd been torn apart, and near the edge of the clearing, collapsed against a snow-caked boulder, was a wolf. A massive, black wolf. "Maddox!" she howled, the sound stolen by the wind. She scrambled down the incline, her paws sliding. He was alive, barely. His great black form was shuddering, his breathing shallow. He was trapped. A heavy, silver-laced bear trap was clamped around his front left leg. It was a cruel, archaic thing, and the silver teeth had bitten deep, right to the bone. But that wasn't the worst of it. A heavy-duty tranquilizer dart, the kind used for grizzly bears, was protruding from his flank, and from a deep gash in his side, a dark, sluggish blood, poisoned with silver, was seeping onto the snow. This was no accident. This was no rogue attack. The rogues had been a distraction. This was an assassination. She shifted back to her human form, the cold so intense it felt like fire on her bare skin. She scrambled to dress, her fingers already numb. "Maddox," she said, her voice shaking. She touched his matted fur. His eyes, a deep amber, flickered open. They were dull, unfocused. He let out a low, agonizing groan. He was trying to shift back to human, but the silver and the tranquilizer were paralyzing his wolf. "Ella." His voice was a bare whisper, a rumble in his chest. "Go, trap. It's silver. I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice suddenly hard. The healer took over. She tore open her satchel. "This is going to hurt." She couldn't open the trap. It was heavy steel, and her hands were too cold. She had to work on the wound first. She packed the gash in his side with the silver antidote moss, her fingers burning as they came in contact with the poisoned blood. Maddox roared, a choked, wet sound. "Stay with me, Alpha," she commanded. The trap was the problem. The silver was pumping directly into his system. She looked at the heavy steel springs. She wasn't strong enough. Not as a human. She shifted back to her wolf form. She jammed her muzzle between the steel jaws of the trap, ignoring the searing pain as the silver touched her own gums. She bit down, using her full jaw strength, prying the teeth apart. The metal groaned. She pushed, tasting her own blood until the jaws were open just enough. Maddox, with a final surge of strength, yanked his leg free. He collapsed, panting, the black of his fur stark against the white. He was free, but they were miles from home. He couldn't walk. The tranquilizer had deadened his limbs, and the silver was in his blood. He looked at her, his alpha gaze clouded with pain and confusion. "Why?" he breathed. "Because you're my alpha," Ella said, shifting back to human to tend the new wound on his leg. She was shivering violently, her own body temperature plummeting. She looked at him. He was a 250-pound man, all muscle and dead weight, and they were, by her estimate, at least 10 miles from the pack house. "We have to move," she said, her teeth chattering. "You have to shift. You have to." "Can't," he mumbled. "Wolf. Sleeping." Ella looked at the sky, at the impenetrable wall of white. "Then I'll carry you." The statement was absurd. Ella, who weighed 120 pounds, soaking wet, was going to carry a man twice her size. Maddox let out a huff that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so full of pain. "Leave me, Ella. It's an alpha's order." "No." Her voice was flat, final. The Omega who had fled his hall in tears was gone. In her place was a woman made of glacial ice and iron. "You're not dying here." She knew she couldn't lift him, not in the conventional sense. She used her training. She crouched beside him, forcing her arms under his, and hooked them around his neck. "Maddox, you have to help me, just a little. Get on your feet." He groaned, his entire body rigid with poison. "Can't feel my legs." "I don't care. Try." With a roar of agony and effort, he used his arms to push himself up, leveraging against her. She straightened her legs, her knees screaming, her back bowing under his weight. He was a dead weight, his feet dragging. She took one step, and then another. She made it 50 feet before her legs buckled, and they both collapsed into a snowdrift. The fall sent a jolt of agony through Maddox, and he cried out. "It's no use," he whispered, his eyes closing. "It's too cold." "No." Ella scrambled up. She was already frostbitten. Her fingers were white and numb. She was out of her depth. She looked at her pack, her herbs, her knowledge. Strength isn't just muscle. She had an idea. It was desperate. She found what she was looking for. 2 long, sturdy branches from a fallen pine, and the thin, tough rope she always carried. She laid the branches parallel. She unzipped her father's Carhartt jacket. The canvas was stiff with ice, but it was strong. She wove the rope through the sleeves and body of the jacket, lashing it between the 2 poles. She had built a makeshift travois, a sled. "Maddox, I need you to roll onto this." He did as he was told, his movement sluggish. He was fading. She secured him with the remaining rope. She grabbed the ends of the poles, wrapped the sleeves of her thin flannel around her hands for grip, and pulled. The sled moved. Barely. It was heavier than she could have imagined. The snow was not packed. It was light, deep powder, and the travois sank. Every foot was a new battle. "This is mile 1, she said, to him, to herself. For the first 2 miles, she pulled him as a human. It was a rhythmic torture. Pull, strain, collapse, get up. Pull, strain, collapse. Her back felt like it was on fire. Her lungs burned, and spots danced in her vision. Maddox was silent, a dead weight behind her. At mile 3, she could no longer feel her feet. "I have to. Rest," she panted, falling to her knees. Maddox didn't respond. She crawled back to him. His face was pale, his lips blue. He was dangerously cold. "I'm not strong enough to pull him, but I am warm." She untied him and shifted. Her silver wolf, exhausted and small, curled tightly around his human form. She pushed her nose under his shirt, against his skin, forcing her own body heat into his. She licked his face, the rough texture of her tongue a desperate attempt to keep him present. He mumbled something. "Anna. I'm sorry." Ella's wolf stilled. Anna? Who was Anna? It didn't matter. She stayed there for an hour, sharing her warmth until her own body temperature began to drop. When she couldn't stop shivering, she shifted back. She tied him to the travois. She pulled. Mile 4. Mile 5. The world was a white, featureless purgatory. She lost all sense of time. Her only guide was the incline of the land. Down was toward the river. Up from the river was toward the lodge. At mile 7, one of the branches snapped. Ella stared at it, her mind too numb to process the failure. Maddox rolled off the broken sled into the snow. "That's it," she whispered. Her tears froze instantly on her cheeks. "I can't, I'm sorry." She fell beside him. This was it. The rejected Omega and the dying Alpha, frozen together. A tragic, ironic end. No, a spark, tiny and fierce, ignited in her chest. It was her Omega self, the part built to endure, the part that served. "Get up, Ella." She got up. She left the sled. She couldn't drag him, so she would carry him. She hoisted him onto her back. It was a fireman's carry, a technique she'd read about. His weight was unbearable. She walked 10 steps. She fell. She got up. She walked 8 steps. She fell. She got up. She walked 5. This was how she crossed mile 8 and 9. A brutal, agonizing relay race of 5 steps at a time. She was no longer human or wolf. She was just a machine of pure, unadulterated will. Her hands were raw, her knees bloody. She kept talking, her voice a raw croak. "You don't get to die. You rejected me, you arrogant, stupid Alpha. You don't get to die until you apologize." She was delirious, but she was moving. As the first pale grey light of dawn broke through the receding storm, she saw it, the high, dark outline of the Stonecrest Lodge. It was another half-mile, a half-mile that might as well have been an ocean. She didn't carry him. She couldn't. She dragged him, one arm hooked under his, pulling him through the snow, one agonizing inch at a time. She was sobbing, a dry, choked sound. When she reached the great oak doors of the lodge, she didn't have the strength to knock. She just collapsed, her body falling against the wood, her frost-bitten hand, bloody and broken, banging once, twice, before she lost consciousness. While Ella was fighting the blizzard, Beta Marcus was fighting a political war. Marcus was Maddox's second, and he wore his loyalty like a well-tailored suit, hiding the ambition and resentment beneath. He had been the one to discover the rogue trail. He had been the one to insist he and Maddox hunt it down before the storm, to secure the perimeter. He had returned to the lodge hours ago, just as the storm hit its peak. He'd stumbled into the great hall, his arm bleeding from a defensive wound, a wound he had carefully inflicted on himself with a standard hunting knife. They were too many, he'd choked out to the assembled pack, his performance flawless. Rogues, a dozen of them. They were waiting for us. He sank to his knees, the picture of a devastated soldier. Maddox. He fought, like a legend. He took out 2 of them, but they had silver. They backed him toward the ravine. The ground gave way. Gasps filled the hall. "He's gone," Marcus whispered, burying his face in his hands. "The storm, the fall. He's gone." Vanessa, her face a mask of pale shock, was the first to his side. Her ambition was as sharp as his. She saw her chance at being Luna vanishing, but a new one, as mate to the new Alpha, was materializing. "Marcus, you're wounded," she said, helping him up. "It's nothing," he said bravely. "My only concern is the pack. With this blizzard, the rogues could be using it as cover. As your acting Alpha," he stressed the title, "I am ordering a full lockdown. No one leaves the lodge. It's too dangerous. We will recover Maddox's body when the storm clears." It was a perfect move. He sealed his alibi, established his authority, and, most importantly, ensured that no one would go looking for Maddox. The silver-laced trap, the tranquilizer, and the blizzard would do the rest. By the time the storm cleared, Maddox would be dead, and the scavengers would have destroyed the evidence of Marcus's treachery. He had thought of everything. Everything. That is, except the quiet Omega healer who lived on the edge of the woods. He hadn't seen her at the ceremony, and in his mind, she was so irrelevant she didn't even register as a variable. She was a ghost, a distraction. He sat by the fire, accepting condolences, his mind already planning his consolidation of power. He would rule this pack. He would be the one to finally wipe out the rival Bloodfang pack. He would be the strong Alpha Maddox only pretended to be. He looked at Vanessa, who was bringing him a cup of cheap whiskey from the bar, a bottle of Jim Beam, a weak human comfort. She smiled at him, a subtle promise. Yes, things were going exactly to plan. The heavy, desperate thud on the main door was barely heard over the dying wind. A young sentry, posted at the door, frowned. "Who's out there?" He unlatched the heavy bar. The door swung open with a groan. What fell into the hall was not a person. It was a heap of ice, blood, and tattered cloth. The pack members in the great hall turned, their conversations dying. Marcus stood, his grieving expression freezing on his face. The heap on the floor moved. It was Ella. She was blue. Her hair was a solid mass of ice. Her fingers were curled into claws, bloody and broken. She looked dead. And then, with a strength that defied all logic, she pushed herself up on one arm. She was shielding something with her body. She was shielding him. Alpha Maddox, unconscious, pale but breathing, was tangled in the remnants of her jacket. A collective, stunned gasp filled the hall. It was as if two ghosts had just walked through the wall. "No," Marcus whispered. It was impossible. He was 10 miles out. In a blizzard, poisoned with silver. No one could have survived that. Ella's eyes, cracked with blood vessels, found Marcus. She saw him standing by the fire, his arm in a clean white sling. She saw Vanessa at his side. She saw the scene of a new king and his queen. She understood. Her voice was a frozen rasp. The entire hall strained to hear. He was ambushed. Marcus's face went white. He started to move toward her. "Ella, you're delirious. Get the healers." "Not rogues," she breathed, fighting to stay conscious. "The rogues were a distraction." Maddox groaned, his eyes flickering. The proximity to his pack, to his mate, was pulling him back. "It was silver," Ella continued, her voice gaining a fractional amount of strength. "A trap. A tranquilizer." Marcus froze. He was 4 feet away. His expression shifted from shock to pure, unadulterated rage. This Omega flea was destroying everything. "She's insane," Vanessa spat. "The cold has taken her mind." "Ask him," Ella said, pointing a broken, bloody finger at the beta. "Ask Marcus where he was. Ask him why the blood on his arm. Smells clean, but the blood on his hip." Marcus's hand instinctively went to the hunting knife on his belt. Ella smiled, a ghastly, bloody expression. "It smells like silver." The pack turned, as one, to look at Marcus. The elders, the enforcers, they all knew the scent. Marcus, seeing it was over, did the last thing anyone expected. He didn't run. He lunged, but he didn't lunge for Maddox. He lunged for Ella. "You worthless Omega, I'll kill you!" He would have. His knife was out, glinting. but a black-furred missile, moving with impossible speed, intercepted him. Maddox, fueled by the last reserves of alpha rage and the primal need to protect his mate, had shifted. He was wounded, his leg dragging, but his jaws were aimed at Marcus's throat. The two wolves, Beta and Alpha, slammed into the wall, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The fight was not a battle, it was an execution. Maddox was wounded, poisoned, and running on the last toxic fumes of adrenaline. Marcus was at his full strength, fueled by the panic of a cornered rat. But Maddox was an alpha, and he was fighting for his life, his pack, and, above all else, the woman who had just dragged him 10 miles from his own grave. He was all rage and instinct, a primal force given form. He ignored Marcus's frantic, raking claws, which tore bloody furrows across his shoulders. He didn't feel them. The silver in his veins was a hotter fire. His entire focus, his entire world, had narrowed to the singular, biological imperative to eliminate the threat to his mate. He caught Marcus's knife arm, the one holding the silver-laced blade, in his jaws. Marcus screamed, a high-pitched, unwolf-like sound as Maddox bit down. The sound of thick bone snapping, a wet, sickening crack, echoed in the deathly silent hall. Marcus howled in agony. Maddox did not release him. He used his grip to hurl the Beta, tossing him like a rag doll. Marcus slammed into the stone hearth, his body skidding, leaving a streak of blood. He landed in a heap, his broken arm dangling at an impossible angle. Maddox stalked forward, his massive black paws padding silently on the wooden floor. He stood over his former Beta, his head lowered, a low, continuous growl vibrating in his chest that sounded like the prelude to an earthquake. He was the incarnation of judgment, and then his body gave out. The rage, the adrenaline, the bond-fueled strength, it all evaporated, and the poison came rushing back in. A violent shudder racked his massive frame. He choked, a wet, bloody cough, and his legs buckled. He collapsed, his 180-pound wolf form landing heavily on top of Marcus, a dead weight. His jaws were still locked, just centimeters from Marcus's throat, but the killing bite never came. The hall held its breath. The only sound was the ragged panting of the two wolves and Ella's dry, terrified sobs. Then, the most agonizing transformation the pack had ever witnessed began. Maddox, pinned to the floor by his own incapacitating weakness, began to shift. It was not the clean, fluid change of a healthy wolf. It was a grotesque, broken reversal. Bones re-snapped and ground together. His fur receded in patches, revealing skin slick with blood and sweat. He groaned, a deep, human sound of pure agony, as his body tore itself apart to find its human shape. When it was over, he lay half on, half off Marcus, naked, covered in his own blood and Marcus's, shaking violently from poison, silver, and exertion. He was pale, his lips blue, his eyes barely slitted open. "Maddox!" Ella shrieked. She tried to push herself up, to crawl to him, but the healers who had been frozen in terror finally rushed forward, holding her down. "My lady, you can't! Your hands! Your feet!" One healer, an older woman named Sorina, pleaded. Maddox, hearing Ella's cry, moved. It was a miracle. He shoved himself off Marcus with one arm, collapsing onto the floorboards. He was on his hands and knees, his head hanging, his long black hair matting with the blood on the floor. Healers rushed to him. "Alpha, you're bleeding out! The silver—" He held up a hand, a weak, trembling gesture, but one that still held the absolute authority of his rank. No. The healers froze. Slowly, his muscles screaming, he crawled. He crawled past his fallen Beta. He crawled to where Marcus's silver-laced hunting knife had skittered across the floor. His fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the hilt. He gripped it. He pushed himself to a sitting position, his back against the hearth. He was panting, each breath a new mountain of pain. He held the knife up for the pack to see. "This," he rasped, his voice a shredded remnant of its former power. "This is not a rogue's weapon. This is Stonecrest steel, our mark." He turned the blade, letting the firelight glint off the unmistakable dark streaks of silver forged into the metal. "Laced with poison. I smell it. I taste it." He locked eyes with the pack elders, who stood, their faces like carved granite, near the front. "He left his alpha to die," Maddox said, his voice gaining a hard, terrible clarity. "He lied to his pack. He raised his hand to his Luna." A wave of murmurs, of shock and confusion swept the room. "Luna?" Marcus, clutching his broken arm, began to sob. "He was weak. He was going to destroy us all with that Omega." Vanessa, seeing her entire life's ambition turning to ash, saw one last, desperate opportunity. The pack was confused. She could use that. "He's right," Vanessa's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the hall. She stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at Ella, who was now half-sitting, propped up on furs. "Look at her. She's a half-dead, frozen corpse. She's no Luna. She's a curse. Marcus did this to save us from his weakness. She must have enchanted him. There's no other way." The pack's murmuring grew louder. They were wolves. They respected strength. What they saw was a broken alpha and an omega who looked like death. "She's right," a warrior near the back shouted. "An Omega Luna. It's an abomination." "He's lost his mind." The tide was turning. They hated the traitor, but they feared the weakness he'd exposed. Ella's face crumpled. She had survived the storm, the attack, the 10-mile trek, only to be torn apart by the very people she had saved. Maddox watched this. He saw the doubt. He saw the fear. He saw the old, ugly prejudices rising up to finish the job Marcus had started. He took a ragged breath. He was bleeding out. He had maybe minutes before he lost consciousness. He had to make them count. He used the last dregs of his power, the very bottom of his Alpha command, and he roared, "Silence!" It was not the powerful, dominating sound they were used to. It was broken, wet, and full of pain, but it was still the command of their Alpha. The hall fell instantly, terrifyingly quiet. Maddox looked at the faces staring at him, faces of fear, confusion, and judgment. He let the knife clatter to the floor, and he began to crawl. He pushed himself off the hearth, onto his hands and knees. The pack watched, stunned into disbelief. Their Alpha, the strongest wolf in 3 territories, the man who had defeated rogues and bears, was dragging himself, inch by agonizing inch, across the great hall floor. A bloody trail marked his progress. Splinters from the rough-hewn floorboards embedded in his palms and knees. He didn't care. He passed the elders, their faces masks of shock. He passed the warriors who looked away, unable to watch the humiliation. He passed Vanessa. She stared at him, her face a sneer of pure disgust. "You're pathetic," she hissed, low enough for only him to hear. "Crawling for her." He didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on one person. Ella watched him come, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. "No, Maddox, stop, please, you're... He didn't stop. He crawled all the way across the hall, through the parting sea of his pack-mates, until he reached the pile of furs where she lay. The healers who had been tending to her backed away as if he were a live wire. He collapsed in front of her. He didn't have the strength to kneel. He was already on the floor. He just folded, his body giving way until his forehead rested on her bundled, massively bandaged, frost-bitten hand. The hall was so quiet they could hear the wind whistling outside. He stayed there for a long moment, just breathing, his shaking, broken body against her. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice so low only she could hear. His breath was hot on her ruined hands. "Ella, Goddess, I'm so sorry. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. Maddox," she wept, her voice a broken rasp. "You're bleeding. Let them help you." They will," he whispered back. Then he lifted his head. It took every ounce of his will. He looked out at the stunned, silent crowd. "You, all of you, you see weakness," he said, his voice gaining volume, projecting to the rafters. "So did I. I was wrong." He gestured with his chin to his own broken, bleeding body. This is what my strength, my power, my arrogance got me, left to die in the snow, poisoned by my own brother." His gaze found Ella's, and the raw, unadulterated awe in his eyes was a physical thing. "This Omega, this weakness," he said, his voice thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him. She walked into a storm that would have killed any warrior in this room. He was telling them now. He was bearing witness. "She found me when I was dying. She fought off the silver with her bare hands. She built a sled from her own clothes and pulled me." His voice cracked. "When that sled broke, she carried me. And when she couldn't carry me, she dragged me 10 miles. Her hands are broken. Her feet are frozen. She is the only reason you are not bowing to a traitor right now. She is the only reason your pack has an alpha." He turned his burning gaze on Vanessa, who had gone dead pale. You call her weak? She has more courage, more strength in her frost-bitten little finger than you have in your entire bloodline." Vanessa recoiled as if he had struck her. Maddox turned back to Ella. His voice softened, but every word was a vow, sealed in the blood and pain that surrounded them. "I, Maddox Blackwood, Alpha of the Stonecrest Pack, was blind," he proclaimed. "I rejected the Moon Goddess's gift. I rejected my mate." A collective, sharp gasp sucked the air from the room. He took her bandaged hand. He was too weak to lift it. He lowered his head and pressed a kiss, his lips touching the rough wool of the bandage. "I claim you, Ella Vance," he said, his voice ringing with every last scrap of his authority. "Not as an Omega, not as a healer." He took a ragged, agonizing breath, pushing himself up just a little to look her in the eyes. "I claim you as my heart, my soul, my equal. I claim you as my Luna." For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute silence. The pack was frozen, caught between 1,000 years of tradition and the undeniable truth they had just witnessed. The first to move was not a warrior. It was Serena, the old healer who had tried to stop Ella from moving. She looked at Maddox, then at the young woman who had survived the impossible. Her stern face softened. She stepped forward, curtsied deeply, and bowed her head. "My Luna," she said, her voice clear. That one word broke the spell. Kyle, the oldest and most respected pack elder, stepped forward. He looked at the kneeling, bleeding Alpha and the broken, triumphant Omega. He nodded once, a sharp, final gesture. He went to one knee. "Alpha," he said. Then he turned his head to Ella. "Luna." It was a cascade. The pack enforcers, the warriors, the hunters, the mothers. One by one, and then in dozens, they dropped. They bowed. They were not bowing to an Omega. They were bowing to a survivor. They were not bowing to a broken Alpha. They were bowing to a humble one. It was a new pack, a new era, born in that moment of shattered pride and unbelievable strength. Maddox, seeing this, finally let his own weight fall. He looked at the elders. Kyle, take them, the traitor, and his accomplice. Kyle's sons, both massive enforcers, stepped forward and grabbed Marcus and the shrieking Vanessa. Banishment, Maddox rasped. Now, into the storm they left me in. No, Vanessa screamed, her arrogance replaced with sheer terror. You can't! It's still a blizzard out there. It's a death sentence. Ella, who had been watching, stunned, found her voice. It was a whisper, but in the silent room, it carried. Maddox. No. He turned his head, his body propped up on one arm. They tried to kill us. I know, she whispered, her eyes full of a pain that went beyond her physical injuries. But we don't do that. That's not us. That's not you. The hall watched, their new Luna's first act. Maddox stared at her, at the compassion that had somehow survived the blizzard, the rejection, and the betrayal. He saw the truth in her words. He gave a single, pained nod. The cells, he commanded, until the storm passes. Then, banishment. They will be stripped of their mark. They will be rogues. They will face the world with nothing, as they left us. The pack saw. They saw her mercy, and they saw his strength in accepting it. The tension finally broke. Maddox looked at Ella, a small, broken smile on his face. Luna, he whispered, and then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, unconscious, his head landing in her lap. Maddox! Ella screamed. The hall erupted. Healers! Kyle roared. Get them! Get them both! To the Alpha's quarters! Now! For 3 days, the Alpha's quarters were a blur of hushed activity. The blizzard raged outside, sealing them in. Maddox and Ella lay in a state of suspended healing. They were rarely conscious. The healers, led by Sorina, worked tirelessly, setting Maddox's leg, purging the last of the silver from his system, and, in a painful, delicate procedure, treating Ella's catastrophic frostbite. Her hands and 2 toes on her left foot had been saved, but they would be scarred for life. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The sun, pale and watery, streamed into the room. Maddox woke first. He was in a cot on one side of the room. He felt hollowed out, but clear. The poison was gone. He looked down, saw his leg in a heavy cast. He felt the pull of the mate bond, no longer a desperate ache, but a steady, warm presence. He looked across the room. She was there, in the Alpha's massive, fur-covered bed. He'd insisted. Her hands were propped up on pillows, 2 massive white mittens of bandages. He tried to get up. Alpha, no! Sorina, who had been dozing in a chair, shot up. You must rest. Your leg is... I will rest, Maddox said, his voice a low gravel, beside my Luna. He swung his good leg over the side of the bed. Gritting his teeth, he stood, using a crutch they had left for him. He ignored the healer's protests and limped, step by painful step, across the room. He carefully, agonizingly, climbed into the massive bed, easing his body down beside hers, careful not to jostle her injuries. He just lay there on top of the furs and watched her breathe. Hours later, Ella's eyes flickered open. The first thing she felt was not pain, but warmth. A large, solid warmth beside her. She turned her head, her movements stiff. Maddox? She whispered, disoriented. I'm here, he said, his voice a low rumble. She stared at him. The arrogant, cold Alpha from the ceremony was gone. The man beside her looked quieter, older. His eyes, now clear, held hers. They hate me, she whispered, the fear returning. The pack. Vanessa was right. No, he said, his voice firm. They don't hate you. They're afraid of you. In a good way. They respect you, Ella. They saw what I was too blind and too stupid to see. Your strength, it humbled them. It humbled me. She looked down at her bandaged hands. I don't know if I can heal anyone again. My hands. You healed me, he said simply. He reached out with his good hand, not touching her bandages, but just hovering over them. You healed this entire pack. Your hands. They're the hands of a Luna. Our Luna. A memory, foggy from the pain and cold, surfaced. Maddox, when you were in the snow, you were delirious. You called for someone. You said Anna. He tensed. His face, which had been so open, closed instantly. He looked away, a deep, old pain surfacing in his eyes. Anna, he said, his voice rough. Anna was my sister, my twin sister. She was like you. She wasn't a fighter. She was kind. She was our pack's best healer. He swallowed, the memory clearly agonizing. She died in the Rogue War. 5 years ago. She ran onto the battlefield to save a wounded packmate. They tore her apart before I could get to her. He finally looked back at Ella, and she understood. The cruelty, the rejection, it all clicked into place. When I saw you, he confessed, his voice thick. When I felt the bond, all I could see was her. I saw that same selflessness, that same stubborn courage, and it terrified me. I was convinced that the pack's cruelty, my responsibilities, that this life, it would destroy you, just like it destroyed her. So you tried to destroy me first, Ella realized, her heart aching for him, for the sister he'd lost. You tried to push me away, to protect yourself from caring. I was a coward, he admitted, the words torn from his soul. I called you weak, because I was terrified of your strength. I couldn't lose you too. And I almost did, because of my own pride. Ella, ignoring the searing pain, moved. She slowly, carefully, lifted one of her heavily bandaged hands and rested it against his cheek. He was real. He was warm. He was hers. You won't lose me, Maddox, she whispered, her stormy eyes holding his. I'm too stubborn to die, and you're too stubborn to let me. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes, a single hot tear escaping to trace a path through the stubble on his jaw. I will spend the rest of my life, he murmured, making this up to you. I swear it. A small, weary smile touched her lips. You can start by having someone send up some stew. I'm starving. And maybe try not to reject me in front of the entire pack again. It's bad for morale. He let out a sharp huff of air that was almost a laugh, which turned into a pained cough. He settled back down, his eyes shining. That, he said, I can promise. Rest, Ella. He leaned over and pressed a gentle, reverent kiss to her forehead. Rest, my Luna. We have so much work to do. Ella closed her eyes. The mate bond, once a source of agonizing pain, now settling into a warm, healing, and unbreakable light. It clicked into place, not with a jolt, but with the gentle, perfect certainty of a key finding its lock. They were broken, they were scarred, but they were whole. And as they fell asleep in the pale winter sunlight, the Stonecrest pack, under its new, compassionate, and iron-willed Luna, began to heal. And that's how the rejected Omega, the one they called weak, showed an entire pack what true strength looks like. Ella didn't just save her alpha. She saved her entire pack from a traitor and from its own blindness. She proved that the strongest heart is often the one that's been broken, and the greatest power is the courage to show up when everyone else has given up. What did you think of Ella's incredible journey? Was Maddox's redemption earned? Let me know in the comments what your favorite part of the story was. If you love stories about underestimated heroes and karmic justice, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story. Hit that notification bell and please share this video with someone else who needs a reminder that even in the worst storm, your inner strength can be the light that guides you home. Thanks for listening.